Mr. John Peel.
Terrible creaking as I got into the chair.
Was that your spine or the chair?
No, it's just my fat.
John, wonderful to have you here.
Oh, well, it's very nice. Oh, it's very nice being here, obviously. Never been here in my life
You've
before.
never been here before?
No, certainly not. I don't like flying.
My compatriot.
It was one of those situations where, as you get older, you think, I'm not likely to be asked to come to New Zealand again, so it'd be stupid not to
give it a go.
Yeah, absolutely. So, first day, I was so full of tranquilizers, I barely knew where I was.
Right.
But yesterday, it rained all day, of course. But being English, we went out and walked through the rain and had a thoroughly good time. And my wife, Sheila, gave me a great deal of pleasure by falling flat on her backside and in the middle of town. And
from that moment on, you were much more cheerful and things have come right.
It cheered me up no end. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, John, we'll get into it in a moment. We might just play a track from a local band, because I thought today we might play a few tracks from local bands you might not have heard of.
Yeah, I look forward to that. I think it's sad that Jihad, or whatever it is, Shihad had to change their names just to satisfy American business interests.
Yes. I hope it's not one of those defining points in a band's career, and from now on...
It easily could be, you know. I've often noticed this with bands that I like, that they reach a point where they sign to a major label, and the major label has certain expectations and requirements of them that seem to kind of... There's not a major change, but they're somehow denatured, you know, and they become less characterful and less interesting.
Being a father, pacifier has certain connotations which doesn't make me think of mosh pits or loud guitars.
No, it doesn't, no. We were talking on the way up about death metal, which I really like. I mean, because obviously a lot of it's quite funny, really, in a way.
Yes, which a lot of people, it's lost on a lot of people, they don't understand that.
Yeah, and I was looking for a record just yesterday by a band with a spectacularly rude name, and which I'm determined to find before I go back. I can't tell you what it is, so I don't know why did I mention it. Pointless. Can I?
I don't know. Of course you can.
Are you allowed to say the C word on?
Of course.
Oh, so well, it's a band called Cunt in that case.
Right.
And
that would have been a better name for Shihad, I think.
Yeah. Oh, well, yes, it would. Yeah. And they've got there was a track on this LP, or maybe in the LP title, I can't remember, which is "Fist the Dead." And I thought, so going into a record shop, so, excuse me, I wonder if you got "Fist the Dead" by Cunt, please, and you know.
There's a Christian sheet music
because we
shop
old men
there.
like, you know, old blokes like saying rude words. It's one of those things. It has a name even. It's a disease. I forget what it's called.
John, you've been in radio now for 40 years.
Yes.
You've been on the radio for 40 years.
Shocking, really. It's one of those things. I was given the OBE by our glorious... Well, she wasn't the Queen, rather disappointingly. It was Prince Charles. And it's one of those things that... very strange event. I mean, I won't go through the whole thing because it's about a half an hour long story, but he stands there on a platform so that he's taller than you, and he's got an equerry, you know, who's one of those kind of... somebody who's still got the same haircut they had when they were 8, you know what I mean, which was a bit dodgy anyway. And he obviously just leant forward and said, 40 years of the BBC, sir. And then you go up and he does goes through the routine. And you get these things for either... you can see it as... either being indicating a life dedicated to public service broadcasting, unselfish dedication, or you can see it as a shocking lack of ambition, you know, and it's both of those things, really. And once I'd got onto the radio, which I did in Dallas, Texas, originally, it's all I ever wanted to do, you know, so I didn't want to, like, play Hamlet or get onto television or do anything else. Just wanted to carry on doing what I do, you know, and that's all I want now for the rest of my life, really.
You've done spectacularly well at it, and obviously a household
name.
Well,
just stayed there, that's all, you see, that's just getting in and staying
through
there.
Doing that and just being a constant, though, you're almost a household name in certainly the pop music circles, and bands right, I mean, from Hendrix to the White Stripes, that's a big gap. Not so different when you put them next to each other, perhaps.
No, that's true. Yeah.
But you've seen a lot. What keeps you interested in the music still? Is it a passion for music, or just the new, or is it broadcasting?
Well, it's mainly the music, to be honest. I mean, I grew up, you know, after the war, living out in the country. No access at all to live music, really, and there weren't that many records being released, and I had my dad's old record collection, which was all 78s, but I kind of just like the culture and everything that went with it, you know, and I used to read all these, they were mainly jazz and dance band records that he had, and I used to read about them all, and it just seemed so exciting. And then when rock and roll came along, I mean, I went to see some of the kind of great 50s stars whose names would be unknown to youngsters like yourselves.
Ray Martin and his concert orchestra.
No, that's almost a good try. But it's people like Frankie Lane and Johnny Ray were the kind of the big American stars at the time. And kind of good in their own way, because Johnny Ray was...
Poor old Johnny Ray.
well, they found out he was gay, you know, and of course and that was the end of his career, which was really sad for him. But he was immensely exciting, and but then when rock and roll first came along, and I first heard Elvis Presley on a Forces Request program. There used to be this program, 2A Family Favourites, which would unite families in England with occupying forces in Germany. And it would be one of those things where they say, you know, we've had a request from, like for Lance Bombardier Higgins, from all of his family in Market Drayton, you know, and he's in BFBO, whatever it was. So it was all of this kind of stuff. And then they put on Elvis, and nothing was ever the same again. And it's difficult now because people listen to, it was Heartbreak Hotel, you know, and it doesn't sound that astonishing. But at the time, it sounded really as though it had come from another planet, because it was so elemental and so devoid of pretense and trickery, and it was just so kind of clean and clear, like in a sense like like the White Stripes are now, just stripped down to the basics. And I was just bowled over by that.
The number of people who list Elvis Presley as their first, you know, why did Jimmy Page pick up the guitar? From all down the line, Elvis is the one which triggers so many, you know, people's getting into rock and roll and the whole music thing. And it is difficult for people, I think, getting into music now as youngsters, to understand the impact which it must have had. Because there's so much more music produced now than there was. It's a massive
too much, almost. I mean, I'm grateful for the fact that the technology exists for everybody to make their own record if they want to. And they do, and you know, and they send me copies of it. I mean, our house and our garage and our garden shed full of unheard stuff, and I listen to music at home around the clock almost. When I'm awake, you know, I'm listening to music, but there is almost too much of it now.
Well, I wonder this. Does John Peel ever get the chance to pour a glass of wine and listen to some favourite music rather than the continuous barrage of new music which you must get?
But the thing is, I don't really often want the glass of wine. It's fine, actually. Here we've been here for like a quarter of an hour already, and no wine has been offered. But
get the wine.
I want to hear what I've not already heard. You know, right. I mean, I don't often play a track on the radio more than once or twice. You know, most things are getting played. When I do a program, most of the records on there are being played for the first time, possibly the only time. But then you have to think too in terms, because the other radio programs, and this sounds as I'm blowing, you know, my own trumpet a bit here, but the point is that other people's programs are seen as being quite radical within the context of Radio 1 generally. You know, that's the national station. But within the context of the culture that they claim to be representing, they're actually very conservative. And so I find myself for example, I'll always finish my Tuesday night programme with a kind of death metal record, because the programme that follows mine is a kind of metal programme. But often when I listen to it, the record that I've played has been the kind of hardest one of the night.
Right, yes.
You know, and I think that's sad. So you get a situation at Radio 1 where they have this playlist system, like a lot of radio stations do. But what they're looking for is kind of pleasing uniformity, you know. It's as though they were trying to design a restaurant, you know what I mean, so that everything was harmonious, and you know, and I don't think that's what it should be about. I think you should run the risk of delighting your listeners. So people are going to say, guess what I've just heard on the radio, you know, phone their friends and say, you must listen to this. So when something like White Stripes' Hotel Yorba came along, instead of just saying, hey, this is a great record, let's put it on the radio, they said, we'll have a meeting. You know, they sat down, they played it in one of these playlist meetings, and then said, well, we'll listen to it again next week. And then they listened to it again a third week, and then they put it on, and this is one of those things that's almost surreal, you know. They put it on, they have a category, the C list, where it's listed but not played. And you think, well, what is the point?
What's the point of the C list?
So they have this, so White Stripes can say, hey, you know, good news, we're on the C list at Radio 1 in Britain. So how often is it getting played? Oh, it's not getting played. It's on the C list, though. And you think, what a stupid idea that is.
Is it possible for a band, or for good music perhaps, let's say good music, to rise to the surface and be, you know, made available to people internationally without the massive music machine behind it, without it going into the system and being churned out the other end? Can it float to the surface?
Well, I think it can, and it occasionally does.
Because everyone in a practice room sitting there with their guitars thinks, if we make music that's good enough, the people will listen to it, the people will find it, it will you know... time and time again that's not the case.
It doesn't happen, no, but it depends what it is, what your expectations are, what your hopes are. We were talking about this just a few minutes ago, actually, in the record shop, and there seems to be a point, when bands sign to do that thing where they sign to a major label, and I often get accused, because often that's the point at which I lose interest, and people see it as a kind of, reverse snobbery, where you think, because they're not obscure and unpleasant anymore, you don't want to play them on the radio.
You liked them when they were called cunts, didn't you?
Yeah, well, that's right, but that's right. But the point is that there seems to be something that they have to do in order, some kind of rounding off of the rough edges, some kind of smoothing out of the processes that kind of denatures them. It does. It's like neutering. I was trying to avoid, because people are going to think I'm obsessed. But I was going to say it is like a castration process, and that's terribly depressing to witness. But I've seen and heard it time and time and time again. So it depends what your expectations are. There are a lot of, and I think because of dance music particularly, and the fact that a lot of it is anonymous, you just get white labels that arrive, and there's no name on there, no title, no explanation at all. Just the record arrives.
Take the edges off that.
And so it's and I like that, So their hopes for that record are utterly different to the hopes of somebody who releases a record on a major label.
Right. Tell me, do you think that over the years, you've witnessed, over the last 4 decades, you've witnessed a lot of music come and go, and you've witnessed a lot of movements come and go. Is there any point or points over that period where you've gone, crikey, there's an unusually large amount of very good music being produced at the moment, and further to that, do you think that you can pinpoint or point your finger at certain things that are happening in politics, around the world, technology, even the evolution of music, where you can go, well, yes, looking back now, that was because of that, or that, that movement started because, apart from the obvious ones like perhaps the late 60s.
Yeah. Well, I've never really thought about that. That sounds like that's a university topic, really.
Never been to university?
No, me not. Well, I've been there to do gigs and things like that, and pick up my children and take them back to, that sort of thing. But I think, I'm sure that you could produce a jolly scholarly and fantastically boring treatise on precisely this topic, but I think you can. I don't think these things bear analysis.
Right.
I think you just get in there and enjoy it.
Yes.
And so often you you read reviews, you read criticism in the papers, in magazines and stuff. I was talking about this earlier on, but when I was a kid, I used to grow up, the only magazines I could get that were about music were about jazz. I mean, this was in the late 40s, early 1950s, and there were 2 magazines, Jazz Monthly and Jazz Journal, and I used to read these avidly, and I didn't know anything about any of the musicians. You couldn't get the records, you couldn't hear the music on the radio, but it was about music, and it was written enthusiastically. But, my 2 favourite musicians at the time, just because I thought they had such great names, and if somebody said, well, name a tune that they played, I wouldn't have been able to. Stanley Turrentine, because I used to think, what a great name.
Yeah.
And Paul Quinichette, another great name. I think both of them tenor sax players. And if somebody said, who are your favourite musicians? Stanley Turrentine and Paul Quinichette, I'd have said. And if somebody said, hum one of their tunes, I couldn't have done it. But I used
still
to
stands up as a fine answer, though.
I think, yeah, but I used to, thank you. I used to read these things, and they were written in such a scholarly way. I used to think to myself, I bet Stanley and Paul wouldn't understand this stuff if they read it. And I think if you're writing criticism that will go over the heads of the people who are making the stuff that you're criticising, then you've missed the point. So to me, I'd sooner stick with something primitive and elemental. So rather like I always tell people that my absolutely all-time favourite record, and the one that's going to be played at my funeral, is the Undertones' Teenage Kicks, because I just don't think anybody has improved on that. It's just so basic and so straight and funny and clever and just fantastic. So, in fact, I'm going to have the words "Teenage Dreams So Hard to Beat" on my tombstone, aren't I?
Well, I was going to ask you this, because Spike Milligan always said on his tombstone he wanted written, Spike Milligan wrote The Goon Show, then died. I was going to say, but you might not care. I'm not insinuating that you're getting anywhere near the point where you might need to start thinking about it.
I'm closer to it than you are, unless your luck changes.
But is there anything... I'm going to ask you to sign a picture of Motorhead in a minute. You might kill me then. Is there... You didn't say anything. Is there anything, or do you really care, that you perhaps would want to leave behind, saying, I did that?
I'm only fathered 4 children.
Yes, apart
from... what else? Well, I did marry her, eventually, What else? What things have I ever said that I was proud of?
OBE.
No, not really. That was a bit of a joke, to be honest. Not really.
Not really?
No. I mean, the thing is that you're aware of the fact that you've in sort of difficult times, and I think times are so different now for like our children. When I was a kid, you had really no options at all. You know what I mean? You went to school. The only option you could exercise was failure. Because if you failed to the exam or something somewhere down the line, then you got out of the system, But I went to boarding school. I sent off to boarding school when I was 7 years old, and when I was 13, I took an exam and went to another boarding school. And then when I got towards the end of my time there, the idea was that I then went on to university. But in those days, that meant Oxford or Cambridge, and and people who didn't go to Oxford and Cambridge, because it was a kind of school you had to pay a lot of money, middle-classy kind of kids. And if you didn't go to Oxford or Cambridge, you'd rather let the side down. So you'd have to do something like go and join the Kenya Rifles for 5 years, disappear, until people had forgotten it. It's true. People really did do that. But when people said to me, if you don't work hard, you won't go to university, yes. I thought, you have unwittingly given me the key to eternal happiness here, because I thought if I went to university, it would be one of those things like you see in films where you'd have to stand on a 400-year-old oak table and be pelted with bread rolls, and so while you were singing There Is a Tavern in the Town in Latin. So when they said, you won't have to do that if you don't pass your exams, I thought, that's terrific.
Yes.
So I didn't pass my exams, and I had to go into the army instead. But I enjoyed the army because
you had a good time in the army.
Because there's never any danger of me having to kill anybody, or more importantly, be killed.
Right.
But I just learned a lot about kind of coping. Not as much as I needed, but when I left school, I barely functioned on any human level at all. And after 2 years in the army, I could clean my own shoes and brush
roll a
my
cigarette.
own teeth and things. Yeah. So I wasn't a complete incompetent. But whereas now our kids, we've got 4 children, and 26, 24, 22, and 20. 3 of them graduates, effectively one of them's just got a job actually, but unemployed graduates effectively, and another one is still at university. And their problem is that they have too many options, and so they're not sure what to take up, because they think, if I take that, tomorrow something better's going to come along. And I really feel sorry for them.
I do too. I think that it's a worse situation, because and there's also that increases the pressure to decide.
So if I can, at some stage, a lot of people at home will at some stage or another have listened to the programme and derived some benefit from so doing. And I occasionally get letters from people who say, I was listening to your programme at home, and I had the radio on under the bed clothes, and so my mum came in and gave me a bollocking and said, "What are you doing?" And I told her, and she said, "Oh, I used to do that when I was your age." And that's fantastic to have kind of just been woven in a kind of small way into the fabric of people's lives. I think that's about as nice a thing as can happen to you.
Does much material from New Zealand, or does anything which you can remember recently, float up to the top and into your realm as far as New Zealand music goes?
I'm ashamed to say that it doesn't, but one of the things that I'm hoping to do is go away from here, suitcases groaning with New Zealand music and music from other parts of this, the world, part of this. Other areas of this part of the world is what I'm trying to say. Because I like being able to go back and say, put stuff on there and say, hey, this happens somewhere that you're not likely to go to very often, or this is what's going on the other side of the world. And but prior to this, really not very much at all. I mean, Flying Nun stuff used to occasionally get through, but by their own admission, it'd be very spasmodic. You'd get a rush of records, and then for a couple of years, nothing. And then, but we had, I think Bail to Space were a favourite of those bands, and I'm not absolutely certain that they didn't once record a session for the programme as well, but I actually can't remember, which is rather shocking, but we have had something like 2,000 or 3,000.
Is it up to 2,000 or 3,000?
I think it is. I just said that because, but you then pulled me up on it. I was hoping to get away with it.
Oh no, it is.
So I don't know. It could. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I mean, it could be anything, to be honest. I mean, but there's been, you can work it out. There's been at least one a week for
a lot. There's a lot of them.
30 years.
Yes.
So that's 30 times 50, which is actually it's more than that. What is 30 times 50? That's 1,500.
Yes.
And sometimes there's been more than one a week, closer to 2. So 3,000 might not be far short of the mark.
Yeah. You once said if you lived to be 1,000 years old, you could never say what your favourite records were or your favourite record was.
Yeah, but I've proved myself to be a liar there. But inconsistency, I think, is part of being a human being. You can make a note of that and turn it into a T-shirt if you like.
Inconsistently woven into the fabric of humanity.
Absolutely so.
So, but I am going to ask you this, a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Favourite live performance that absolutely knocked your socks off, that you thought, crikey, that's done it for me?
Well, it's something that's fantastically uncool, but in the context, it was perfect. I went to a live gig in a place called Sunderland in the north of England, and it's a very depressed place, alas. A lot of unemployment and a lot of social problems. There were then and there are now. But like so many other things, football can transform that. And Sunderland, at that time, they used to have now it's the Premiership in the First Division, so on, but then there was the First and Second Division. Sunderland were in the Second Division and had just beaten Arsenal in the semi-final of the Cup the year they went on to win it, and they were the first Second Division team to win the Cup in something like 60 years or something amazing. And the whole city, sad place that it is, really, was en fete. I mean, everybody just delirious with joy. And the perfect band to capitalise on that were the Faces with Rod Stewart, because they were, they were like that all the time. And and we actually, Sheila wasn't at that one, but we went to a lot of their gigs and we spent a lot of time with them. Because when I first met them, I was busy being kind of cool and detached. And then I observed them, and it was around the same time I met Sheila, and the same was true of her. And I thought, actually, they're having a much better time than I am. Here am I being kind of cool and laid back and bored out of my mind, And so I started kind of going around to their gigs with them, but when they played Sunderland, we played in a huge ballroom that had got artificial palm trees in it in the middle of the dance floor. I mean, how much more can you require from life than that? And they came on, and they always used to come on and kick like dozens of footballs out into the audience, smashing the lights and stuff like that.
They did that from the stage?
Absolutely, yeah. Wonderful. So they gave me some footballs to kick out, and I got my footballs probably rather further than any of them. I was rather proud of that. But I ended up, and I don't dance, I always tell people, when people say, how come you don't dance? I always say, shrapnel. In the Korean War, don't like to talk about it. And I was only 11 when the Korean War ended, but people say, sorry, I shouldn't have mentioned it. But I ended up dancing on stage, waving a bottle of a product called Blue Nun. And it was just like the most extraordinary night of my life, I think, musically.
You know that someone's going to come up to you and actually point out the fact you're in the 4th Filing Cabinet Regiment or something at some point, don't you? Completely blow the shrapnel answer.
Oh, and of course, as I say, obviously I never fought in the Korean War, as I say, because I was 11 when it ended. But people are so embarrassed that they've mentioned it that they don't say, hold on a second, that can't be true. That's right.
All right, John, well, I know you've got to get going. Thank you very much.
Apparently so. I don't know where I'm going, to be honest, but...
Something presses, something pushes, and we understand that. Okay. But you're going to be quite busy with your time here over the next week or so, and involved in Intermediate, which is happening at various venues around the town, and just about sold out, I understand. The British Council behind bringing John out to be involved in Intermediate.
Quite what I'm supposed to do, I don't know. I think just sit there and drink lots of your excellent red wine. I think
sounds like a bad time.
It sounds like a very fine time to me, yeah.
And we're, although it's sold out already, we're hosting a small evening next Saturday night, so we hope to be able to let people hear the results of that in the future.
Okay.
And once again, thank you very much. Great to see you and fantastic to meet you.
Okay, nice to meet you too.